if you're not getting your certifications, I know Microsoft changes them all the time. Please keep up your learning. I like doing presentations like this because it reminds me of the basics. And a lot of times, you forget about them if you don't keep on applying them. One of the things I want to point you to is John Miner at GitHub 3. I am John F. Miner III, so that's why it's John Miner 3. If you go into community work, there's 20-something presentations here. The code and the presentations are freely given to the community. The one I'm going to be talking about tonight is going to be audit and prevent unwanted actions, okay? And this is a great presentation because I used to work for a company called Sensata, and they were worldwide, and they did manufacturing. And they had this table that actually controlled the machine that made these widgets, and the widgets actually go into cars. And what they did is they kept like maybe oil pressure, that was one type of widget, and so on. But the actual recipe for making the widget was in a SQL database. And if someone changed it and suddenly bad parts came out, guess what? It was really important to track who actually made that change. And so today we're going to talk different ways to track changes. That's auditing, and also prevent changes, okay? This is my profile in MS SQL Tips. I've been writing for a while. I almost got about 75 articles. Last year I was the author of the year, which was awesome. So thank you for everyone for voting. One of the things I want to point you to is 2 articles that are related to what we're talking about today. Audit and prevent unwanted SQL Server table changes. We're going to get into that in the presentation itself. But the actual change, the data that's going to be changed, is going to be stored into either a table per each table. So it's an audit table per regular table. That I suggest that pattern if you get large set of data changes. If you don't have large set of data changes, then you can have one table be the audit table for many different tables. Okay, the triggers will point to there and put the data in. The way I actually save the data is XML, and this article shows you how to reverse engineer the XML. So if you do a delete, well, guess what? The opposite of rolling back a delete is an insert, right? And if you did a change, rolling back that change is another change, right? And so on. One of the things that's really hard to track is flex statements. A lot of those people that work in the HIPAA industry, okay, HIPAA is for medical. There's really nothing good out there for tracking SLEX, okay? And the only thing I can suggest for you is maybe using stored procedures, okay? Or, maybe using a product. I only seen one product out there, Confio, and I think Confio has a product that actually looks at the transactions that go to the database. But other than that, there's really no good way to do this. The second thing I want to talk about is a SQL audit. So this is custom auditing versus SQL audit. And SQL audit, again, has a limitation that you can't track a select. You can't say, hey, John, want to do select from, the patient table where last name is mine. And maybe I was looking for, my mom was in the hospital, right? Just a hypothetical situation. And again, both of these do not have a good story for select. Insert, update, and delete, definitely awesome stories. And again, we're at SQL Saturday, Bangladesh, and we'll get right into it. So today, during the demo, I'm going to be using a virtual machine. So if you haven't used virtual machines, this is what it looks like. I did expose the IP, so we can talk from my local computer to the computer. And we're going to do an example about how to stop certain programs from working, and that'll be MS Access, okay? So let's go to the main page, and let's start the demo. At least the presentation first, and then the demos. And it should be flickering for a second, and hopefully you can see it. So if you can't see it, tell me. If not, I'll assume everyone sees it. Okay. So again, this is SQL Saturday 1004. My name's John Miner, and I already gave you all this information, so I'm skip past it. So what is the audience for this actual talk? Okay, there's 2 people, or 2 groups of people I think about. One is the SQL Server developers, okay? So how do you use table, database, and SQL Server triggers to prevent and audit various actions? So you can either roll back the action, or you can audit, which is the consequences of the action somewhere, right? And obviously you can put a drop database trigger on a server. Obviously, if it's a 4 terabyte database and you're dropping it, it's going to take a long time to undo that action, okay? So, it's very important that security is in place. Okay, that's your first line of defense. We're going to explore other contracts, and there are other ways to control the case, and we'll talk about that. As for administrators, you need all the tricks of the developers, okay? Granting the correct privileges for principals and objects is really important. We'll talk about change data capture as another alternative and why I don't like it, but it does some things. And you can see what the differences are, and we can talk about it. So today's corporations are usually multi-geo corporations, right? If you're working for Sensata, and I worked for Sensata back in 2011, we had plants in Hungary, we had plants in East Asia, we had plants in the UK. It was all over the place, right? And so the problem is that there's many different people that might have sysadmin privileges, okay, to your databases. So, and change control process might be weak because, you know, I worked at a bank. Change control was really important because you're talking millions, if not billions of dollars, right? And so something, you know, was a detrimental change. You know, that would be a big concern. So there's always a change control meeting each week and also a rollback plan, right? Also, SDLC is really important when putting this stuff in because you want to test it in a low environment and prevent it to a higher environment, right? So what we're going to talk about today is how to prevent and audit changes so that if something does go wrong, you can figure out what went wrong and how to reverse it. So the techniques we're going to talk about today are granting the correct user access, okay, to the objects. I'll talk about, you know, database roles and how you can set a person to a database role. I suggest using AD group, okay. DML triggers, so data manipulation language, okay. So that's your insert, that's your update, that's your delete, okay. How can we keep track of how the data is being changed? And that's really important when you have those recipe tables. I've been doing a lot of things in the cloud lately, probably the last 3 to 4 years, really heavily doing the modern data platform, which means we're using Azure Data Factory to talk on-premise and bring data to the cloud. And what we do is we use a metadata-driven approach. That means that you have information in the table that drives the ETL. Well, if someone puts the wrong information there, it'll break the ETL. So that's a great way to track, you know, who made the change, right? Data definition language triggers are basically who changed the schema, right? So if the schema changed, someone added a column and suddenly ETL broke, we want to know who did that, okay? We can also not only audit it, but we can prevent data schemes modifications and schema changes by using triggers. And there's a couple techniques to prevent table truncation, so we'll talk about that. I mean, there's really not a real good way to do it, but you can put a foreign key on it. We can talk about change data capture, replication, a few ways to do it. We'll talk about logon triggers, like who logged on when and what were they doing, right? We can find out, you know, what IP they're coming from, right? And we'll talk about why change data capture is an alternative triggers, and that's a log grader, and what's missing there versus rolling your own custom audit. So like anything, we need to have a sample database, okay? And so I thought about, you know, autos. And this is, this diagram was actually created with Oracle. Oracle has something called, I forgot what the name was, but it's Oracle Schema Design. It's like an ERD program, okay? It's a freeware program, and you can look for it out there. And basically, we're going to have a active table, okay, and we're going to have an audit table. So we can see audit.log table changes, and obviously we're curious about, you know, what's going on with the tables, right? And then we have log database changes, right? And that's going to track, you know, who's making changes to the database, okay? And then we're going to have a couple tables. One is cars by country. So we're curious, like, how many cars are being produced by a certain country and what continent is the country on. And also we have that keys, car by country is another table that we can do that foreign key, okay, to actually stop truncations. So I always like Dilbert, and so I always put a little, you know, Scott Adams comic in here. So all the demonstrations are code-based, so I just want to show you how to do it in code. I always did code when I did SQL development. I hope you're not offended. If so, you can leave now. Well, you won't see you leaving because it's virtual. But in the past, one of the things that was interesting out there is this Dilbert construct, comic strip that came out in probably, I think, the 90s, okay? And this, boss comes up and says, hey, Dilbert, I think we should build a database, SQL database. He goes, uh-huh. And he goes, does he know what a database is? Maybe he saw it on a trading mat. He says, what color do you want the database? That's what Dilbert comes out, and the actual boss says, hey, I think mauve has most RAM, right? I want a mauve one. This would have been totally appropriate if instead of saying mauve, he picked Azure, okay? But as you know, Azure is doing really well. I have a few shares of stock in Microsoft, and they've gone up tremendously. So, having SQL skills is very important, and yeah, you'll keep a job by knowing SQL. So let's start from ground zero. So we're going to have to create that database, the Autos database. We're going to make the active and audit schemas. We're going to talk about that. We're going to create some tables. We're going to design two stored procedures to populate the table so we can actually show how, deleting the data from the table and then reloading it, how it actually gets ordered, because a single delete versus a multiple delete actually gets ordered differently. And we're going to do this by executing the code to actually load the tables, right? So let's go into the demo. So I have this server, like I said, spinning up here. Let's slide this over to there and drag that there. Okay. So, and I will see if I can make this 70%. Nah, that's 150. Okay, so there's a bunch of steps. And again, I did this presentation a long time, so we're going to talk about securities for partitioning and so on. So we're in master, and I'm going to do a little cleanup because I was playing around with this to make sure. And if I hit refresh, let's see if it's still there. Okay, so we don't have the audits table. I dropped it. So let's start the process. One of the things we want to do is when creating a new database, we usually start in master. It's always good to see if the database exists, and if not, drop it and then reload it. Be careful with this statement, because if you run this, and I've done this before by mistake, guess what? You suddenly drop the whole database. So this is something that you might want to comment out, and if it fails, then you say, oh yeah, you know what, I'm just reloading, maybe a test environment, and that's fine to drop the database. If it's a real production database, obviously you don't want to do this. A lot of times when I use this, I actually use Visual Studio SQL database projects, and they're a lot easier to maintain, deployment of databases. But that first statement I just showed you is actually going to create the database. So now we see we have an Autos database, and now obviously some settings like the size, is 32 megabyte. This is really a teeny database, 4 megabyte for log and so on. We're not even going to be doing even that much of changes. Okay. Again, some this was done 2.13. Some new constructs have come in, like drop schema if exists versus saying if exists and then selecting from the correct tables. They're both. You might see the newer version that came out in 2016 in the wild versus the older one, which is predating that. So we need to move to autos, right? And we're going to execute, basically create a schema, right? So usually when I'm interactive with people in the room, I say, hey, where are schemas, right? And schemas are a security construct, but they're actually going to be in the security, not storage, right? So we can see we created an active schema, we created an audit schema, okay? So now we can segregate the data. I'll show you how that's done with logins, okay? And now we want to go ahead and say, hey, if there's not a continent table, then we're just going to put some continents in. So we're going to execute. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add a primary key. And we're going to create a stored procedure. And the stored procedure is a very simple stored procedure. It says execute as caller, that's me. And it says insert these values into the table. And now if we execute it, first if we do a select, okay, we're going to see is an empty table, right? Nothing's showing. And if we click on tables, we can see active.continents there. If we execute the actual stored procedure and then run this again, okay, we can see that we actually have data showing, okay? So that's our first table. We're going to create the cars table again. So we're going to drop it if it exists, and it doesn't. And then we're going to add it. Okay. And then we're going to add a primary key. Okay. And we can see right here there is a country ID and country name. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a continent ID. Okay, there's a foreign key. Okay. And we can execute the foreign key. Boom. Okay. And then what we're going to do is we're going to run the same thing. We're going to create a similar store procedure. And this time we're going to add a bunch of car data. So we can see Argentina, India's in there. Okay, and this is kind of stale data because I did this in 2013, but the concept's all the same, right? So we're just going to execute the store procedure, and we can see, if you're curious, that under programming, under store procedures, we should have two of them. Okay, so that is load cars by country and load cars by continent. And again, if we select from the table, there shouldn't be any data, and if we execute this, well, there's going to be some data. Okay. So right now, okay, we don't have any users other than I'm logged in as J Miner and I own the box. So John Miner owns this box. So I happen to be an admin for this piece of hardware, this virtual machine. So I'm automatically an admin for SA, okay? But we're going to create some users now. So we're going to create non-database contained users. So a database contained user means that user goes where the database is, okay? So if you do an Azure SQL, it's really important to do contained users. And if so, you will not be creating logons, you'll be creating users, but I'm going to create logons, okay? So logons show up in the security, okay? So if you look under not for autos, but way down to security here, you'll get a logon, okay? And we see there's no auto user, we have one, so I'm just going to delete this one. And we'll recreate it again. Yes, please go away. Okay. So now we're going to say if exists, then drop it, and then we're going to give it a weird password, and we're going to say the default database is autos. Okay. So we're going to create a user. Boom. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to say, okay, so that's a logon. Now we're going to create the user for the logon with the default schema, meaning I can only see active, right? So execute. Now, one way to actually give out privileges is to assign people to like database roles. So if we go into autos, okay, we can see under security, okay, there's roles. And we can look at predefined roles, okay, so you can have data reader. Sometimes that's great if you want someone just to read something. Data writer, but that means that they could read both the active and the audit. And I don't want to have people see my audit, right? That's kind of like, you know, hey, I'm doing it, I'm the admin, I don't want anyone to know about it, right? So what we really want to do is we want to give privileges just to the active schema. So how can we do that? One way to do is to create a database role. So this statement right here, execute, we'll create a role. So if we go into application roles and hit refresh, this is a database application role, right? Is it in this one? It's one of these. There we go, auto row, okay? So at this point now, what we want to do is we want to, on schema active, give it all to control, which is everything in select. So we're gonna give these permissions to just that one, and we're going to add auto user to that one, okay? So let's do something really quick, and then I'm gonna show you the logon, and we'll catch up on a presentation. So what we wanna do is we wanna create a table to track changes, okay? And what we're going to do is we're going to create this table called log table changes. We're going to execute. And we're going to add this table right here, okay? And we're going to add some defaults, okay? So we're going to execute this, okay? And now if we go ahead and we hit refresh, okay, we have active and audit, okay? So let's log in, okay, as other users, right? So that was a SQL authentication user that we created, right? Standard. And so it's auto user. I'm not going to know the password off the top of my head because it's kind of complex. I need to come back here and do Control C on that before we do this. We go back to SQL authentication. We do auto. I'm pretty sure this is case sensitive, insensitive, I mean. And so Control V, remember password, connect. Okay, we get a not connection. Now, if we go into autos, right, and look at tables, okay, hey, the audit table's not there. So that's one way to do security, okay? So give the actual rights that, least amount of rights that the person needs to actually use. If you're doing applications, you want to think about persona, like the user. What does he usually have? Maybe he has database reader and database writer and nothing else. They can't change any tables. They can just add data, right? If they're doing stored procedures and you wrote the application to do stored procedures, maybe you have an application. Okay, so these are things to think about when you're the system administrator and the developer, okay? But this is one great technique because now we logged in, and guess what? In reality, there's an audit table, but no one else sees it. Okay, so we talked about granting user access and the principle of least security. Never give out more than you need to. So you don't want to give, the secretary SA because you never know what might happen, right? So you just give them the rights that they really need to do their jobs, right? And principals are objects that have access to resources, so logons, groups, roles, right? And securables are any object that can be secured. So we can put secure a table, a view, a stored procedures, right? And the things that you can do when granting roles, and this is data control language, right, is actually granting a role, revoking a role, and denying a role, okay? And whenever possible, use standard database and server roles if you can. Sometimes they're not easy to do, and if so, you can make your custom database role, but I wouldn't sign it at the user level because it's a lot of maintenance. So how can we audit data changes? Table triggers can be used to audit inserts, updates, and deletes. And again, I told you that auditing a select is a really hard thing to do. The only way to do it is really use stored procedures and call them from your application. A lot of applications are already pre-built by the vendors, so that's a really difficult problem to solve, right? A user-defined table is used in this way. I set this up to keep track of the following. It's going to keep track of the change type. Is it insert? Is it an update, delete? Who did it? When it happened? The host name, the schema, the object, and the raw data role, right? And one table can be used for the whole database just to add a trigger for each table. So let's look at steps 7 through 9 in the demo. So if we go back to the virtual machine, okay. And let's bring this down a little. Okay. Go over a little. There we go. So we talked about creating this table. We added it, right? So now what we're going to do is we're going to create a trigger called fluid data. Okay. If it's there, delete it. If not, what we're going to do is we're going to put it on active cars by country. And it's for insert, for update, and for delete. So there are two types of triggers. There's a after trigger and there's instead of trigger, okay? And these fall in the case of an after trigger. So an action happens and you can do something after it. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and there's two tables that exist, okay, when a trigger actually executes. There's an inserted table and a deleted table. So if we do select star from inserted and exist, and there's nothing in the deleted table, then it's insert, okay? If we select star from deleted and exist, but there's nothing inserted, then it's a delete, okay? And last but not least, insert is that you have something that was deleted, which is the old record, and insert is the new records, okay? And so what we're gonna do is we're going to insert into the table, okay? And we're going to select from the deleted or whatever record that is important as XML and call the root record set type. So now we're going to store XML that's going to actually capture our audit for the raw data, okay? So we're going to delete the trigger if it exists. We're going to add it. So now the trigger exists, okay? So let's test this, okay? And so I'm going to clean up a little. I don't think we need this one, so we're going to disconnect that. We don't need that user anymore. And if we hit refresh here, we can see that there's an audit table, and we so let's take a look how we do that. So again, we're going to make another audit table, and it's going to call log database changes. So we're going to drop it if it existed, and we know it doesn't. This one has a change ID. It's identity. Okay, we're going to put a primary cluster key on the ID. It's just something we did. We're going to track the following things: the date, the type of change, change by who, application name, host name, the schema and object, and actual T-SQL that happened. So we're going to add this table. Okay, and we're going to set some defaults. So we're going to get the date and so on, as user, username, app name, host name. So all this stuff I don't have to worry about capturing. I just do an insert. Now we're going to say drop the trigger if it exists. Okay, now this trigger is going to be at a higher level. First one we did is at the table level. This one's going to be at the database level. So we're going to say, hey, if there's any of these events, and we can see it's all the ones I talked about, you know, triggers, functions, procedures, tables, security, then what we're going to do is we're going to get the event data, and we're going to pull some things out of the event data object, okay? And so we're going to get the event type, object name, schema, and some things we're going to say, like, for instance, create statistics that might be going on by the system we don't care about. If the object is something that's being created by the system we don't care about, otherwise we're going to log it, okay? So typical things you would do for a DDL trigger. Let's execute this. Let's test it. So we're going to say delete the existing table makes, right? And if we look here, right, there's no such thing as active make, so we can run this. This shouldn't really do anything. Boom. And then we're going to create a new table. Boom. We're going to add some constraints. One constraint, another constraint. So we're looking for the year start, the year end, right? We're going to say that the maker is going to be unique, and we're going to give it a primary key. Okay. Now, if we, and last but not least, we can go ahead, right, and run this before I do it, and we can show that we can see now this, we did an alter table, we did a create table, so it's in reverse order. I could order, you know, by descending, so this is the last one. And we can see we did create table, we did our check constraints, we did our unique constraint, we did our primary constraint. Last but not least, if we drop the table, and again, we take a look at it, we captured the drop table, okay? So basically, this will capture all the SQL that's actually happening against your DDLs, okay? Your tables, functions, so on, who did it, and when. Just like before, I haven't showed you where this trigger is, but it's at the high level. So last time we went into the actual table object. This time we want to go into the database object. So we look under programmability, right, and database triggers, and we'll see there's a trigger there. If we hit the disable here, okay, this is going to disable it. If we hit refresh, hopefully it executes it, not like it did last time. Let's see this. Still doesn't like me. Okay, try this again. Oh, database triggers. I know I did this. Execute. Fluid schema, right? Refresh. Okay, so remember I said sometime there's a bug? This is one of the bugs. So in the past, this would be red, like the other one. See right now, it's still, you'd have to enable it. It's in disabled state, but it's not showing up as enabled, okay? So how can we do the next thing? Okay, so far we talked about auditing things. How can we prevent stuff? So there's a couple ways we can do that. So one of the things you might want to do is prevent data changes, right? And we can do the same thing with triggers. So we can say triggers can be used to prevent unwanted inserts, updates, or deletes. The checked option of use is a poor man's version of racial integrity and data prevention. Both techniques allow truncation of tables. So even if I put it, you know, a trigger, okay, on a table and said, hey, don't allow, you know, DDL statements, you know, we can roll back the statement. The problem is that truncation will still allow it to be happen, okay? Also, again, security is key. So, you know, when you're thinking about giving out security, data reader, data writer, unless you need something more. And so let's take a look at how this works. So we're going to talk about preventing unwanted data changes. So this is great if you remember we're going to go into our MS Access database, which is this one. And the interesting thing is that every different version of Access has a different name, okay? So sometimes they have certain names, so we can see all tables, right? And, okay, let's see. Navigate to category. Why is it not showing me anything? External data. Right. Thought I had tables here. Custom. Yep. Okay, just bear with me. If not, I'll get it. So, database tools table. Okay, so that's there. I thought I had tables. I guess not. They're already connected. But what we're going to do is external table, try it. And from database, from SQL Server, right? And we're going to do a link table, okay? So we're going to link to it. And what we need to do is we need to do the autos, hit OK. And what we're going to do is we're going to log in, right? So we had what? Auto underscore user, right? And I just need to get the password. Always forget the password. Somewhere around here. So find it. Sorry about this little interruption. If not, let's go Control Home. I know it's at the top. Okay. Should have copied this one. Here we go. Okay, Control C. So if we go here and we hit OK, we can see that we're actually getting in, right? We can do this, and we hit OK. And now, okay, we're actually connected, right? So if we, let's see. I hate this new navigation, but home, custom, where's tables? Tables, here we go. And we can see this is it. And if we double click it, we actually pulled it in. We can see that this is the data, okay? So we want to prevent people from pulling this in, okay? Got 10 minutes, so let's keep on the dime. Okay, Control End. Okay, we're almost at the end. So what we want to do is we want to actually see how this is coming in, right? So we want to look at app names, right? And how can we do that? Well, we just set up this trigger, right? And hopefully I did not disable it. Maybe I did enable it. Trigger disallow users. Did I get rid of the audit? I hope I didn't. Maybe I need to turn this on again. Let me enable this and let me disable it and let me do this again. See if it picked up the name. Okay, and again, I'm worried about what is the name of the application coming in because we're going to actually go ahead and filter on it. See, Microsoft Office System. Sometimes it comes in as different names. And we can come down here, and it does not look like it's picking it up for some reason. It should have done. Okay. So let's close out of here because maybe I already made the connection. Let's try this one more time. Got about 5-10 minutes tops. So let's do this again. So if we go here, okay. So now I'm going to go Control V. So this is where the sign in is. So this is probably going to capture it. Let's see over here if we execute this. Okay. So last but not least, we can see that this one says Microsoft Office, right? And it's in capital M, capital O, right? And look, that's different than in the past because in other ones I've used Microsoft Office System. Maybe that was a version 2013 or something, right? So again, it's one of those things you have to really pay attention to. Okay, so now I'm going to do is I'm going to create this trigger. Okay, execute. Okay, and then we're going to try this again. So we're going to close this system. Access, and what we're going to do is get back in a link table. Every time we use a link table, we have to put the credentials in. Okay, and so we're going to boom, boom, put this, put the credentials in, hit OK, and what do you think is going to happen? There we go. Our trigger comes up and says, hey, I don't like MS Access, okay? So that's what we're trying to do is filter out certain applications. As long as the application has an app name when connecting, you can do it. Let's disable this and talk about last topic, change data capture. I'm gonna go to slides, and then if we get to the presentation, hopefully I'll have time. If not, we'll wrap up. So prevent server logons, we talked about, having the trigger, and we can prevent like Excel access from going to there. So let's talk about change data capture. Okay, how does this work? It's a little different than what we've done. Usually we have a source table, trigger gets logged, executed, and you do an action, right? It's an after trigger. We can roll it back, or we can keep track of it by inserting it into a table. So that's your auditing, that's your prevention, right? Change data capture started in 2008. And what it does is the transaction log allows you to roll back things. That's why you get your assets, right? And if something didn't complete and the database restarts, then it goes to the transaction log, finds it, and plays it for it, right? And what happens is because there's a job there, this job can actually pull, okay, from the log and capture the changes. And there is a job that does it. There's also views and functions that you can use to pull the data, okay? A lot of times back in the past, you can use SSIS to do some of this work, right? So let's talk about the details one. We can go ahead and enable the database, okay, with the CDC. The following agents are made to scoop up the data, so capture and clean up. We can enable the level which creates table names, CT, that tracks what happens on each table, and that's DML or DDL, okay? And these are a bunch of columns, right? Captured columns, change tables, DLL histories, index columns. The LSN is the log sequence number, so that's the time which actually happened, okay? Comments on CDC. Nice first try at change data chapter. Here's some issues though. It's missing the username and host name, which are key items, right? Because we always want to know where it's coming from, right? Alter table does not add a new column to the change data capture list, okay? So if I add a new column, I don't get it. But guess what? In the XML what I was doing, you do get it. Did not define a stop procedure to allow additions to the capture list, okay? And disabling CDC removes the tables. So if I disable like a trigger and turn it back on, I still get audit. In the past, I don't lose it, but with CDC, it goes away. And the timing of the job is not right away, okay? So we talked about the bibliography. There's a bunch of questions. Let me get back to got about 6 minutes to do this demo, and then maybe a minute or two to actually talk about questions. So if you're interested, there's a simple talk. I definitely give people kudos when possible. Take a look at this. Again, we're gonna go to use autos. Okay, and to stop this, we're going to drop out our triggers, right? We're going to drop out audit database chat logs, right? So we're not going to do this anymore. We're going to delete. Why is this? Because you don't have permissions. I should have permissions unless I'm someone else. Delete from these tables. I'm going to select from these tables. Okay, let's drop these. Why does this not execute? Okay, so it's gone, even though it's complaining. And if we select, we can see some empty tables, right? Awesome. So what we're going to do is use master. Okay, and what we can do is we can say, we can check, what's enabled, right? And we can see, okay, that CDC enabled, and I'm excluding any system tables, and we can see autos doesn't have it yet. So what we're going to do is we're going to authorize the database autos to SA. Always love to make sure that happens, right? We're going to use autos, okay? We're going to enable CDC, okay? Now if we, whoops, I'm going to make sure I executed that. Now if we come back here, okay, we can actually see if it's enabled. And once it is enabled at the database level, okay? Now what we want to do is we want to, what tables are tracked? Is anything going on at the table level? And we can see that here's all the tables, and these are all system tables. We ignore those, just active, right? And what we can do is we want to make sure that the SQL Server agent is running, which it is, because it needs to be running to capture logs. And what we're going to do is we're going to, we did this with tables. We're going to actually enable it on both tables. So execute, right? And we're going to execute. It's taking a while. Didn't think it was going to take that long, but yep. See, now it's creating that capture and cleanup job. Okay, and this should go faster because it's not creating jobs. It's actually telling you to add an extra table. And what we can do is we can load the data like we did last time, right? And if we look at these CT tables, right, we can actually see there's nothing. Hey, this system's not working. Microsoft must have made a bug or something, right? Not really. That job that actually is capturing, okay, the actual activity runs periodically, okay? Might not happen right away. We know we sent, at least 39 records in one and another, and hopefully eventually it shows up. I do see this running, right? So it's running. Let's see. This is the only bad thing about this demo is that sometimes it does not show up. Hello. Let's see the job monitor, view the job activity, see if it's running. Next run, runnable. Next run, not scheduled. So capture, why is that? Capture and cleanup. So why is capture not running? Let's just start it. Let's execute this and let's see if this runs. Okay. Okay, refresh. Last run, none. Not scheduled. Never. So this capture should be running. RAIT. And we're executing this, right? So it's in progress. Okay, let's try this again. Okay, well, obviously it's not working, but I'm going to go through what would be going on eventually if this was running, okay? And again, it might be something simple as like the server name for this. I've seen that blow it up, and if so, I have to actually change the server name. We would be getting a start and end SLN, a sequence number, the type of operation, the update mask telling you which one's actually updated, and it'd be actually tracking the data here, okay? And what we can do is we can delete from here and we can see the changes and so on, check the tables again. One thing is, like I said, if we added a computer column, it would not suddenly add it to the table, which is a problem, and we can disable it. So at this point, I'm going to stop the presentation. If you're curious about CDC and want to know more, please give me a holler. With that, that's the end of the presentation. Does anyone have any questions?